Okay, folks, so I want to share some more of this information from this PDF file here. 50 years of the CIA Central Intelligence Agency from 1998. Cold War allies, the origins of CIA's relationship with Ukrainian nationalists. It says here it was declassified and released by the Central Intelligence Agency. Sources and methods, exemption 3B2B, Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, date 2004 to 2008. I think that's an 8. So hard to see this old typewriter print, but I'll try to read it as best as I can. It's 25 pages, so I don't think I'll get through it in just one video, but I'll try. And I'll try to read it without injecting my own personal opinions and a bunch of extra ad lib. And, anyway, I thought it was kind of interesting myself, so I just want to share it. And for anybody out there that just wants to get busy doing some chores or some things around your house, or you just want to listen, you can go ahead and turn it up, and I'm going to read through some of this file. So, it says, in April 1945, Adolf Hitler's Thousand-Year Reich faced imminent and catastrophic military defeat from the West. Allied troops poured into Germany after securing a bridgehead over the Rhine at Remagen. From the east, the Red Army advanced toward Berlin. Millions of refugees fled before the advancing armies, especially in the east. Germans, Ukrainians, Poles, Balts, Hungarians, Romanians, and countless others became displaced persons, or DPs in military jargon. By the end of the war in May 1945, 2.3 million displaced persons were in the American-occupied zone of Germany alone. Allied occupation authorities organized the DPs, the displaced persons, into camps until they could be repatriated. Many, however, refused to return to their homes in countries the Red Army then controlled. Contact with ethnic groups from the Soviet Union gave American intelligence officials the first direct knowledge of dissent within the USSR. Initially, the United States recruited espionage agents from among the immigrant groups. Immigrant means immigrant, more or less. Someone that moves from one country to another, goes to another country. But soon expanded its efforts to include recruitment for potential covert action and paramilitary operations. So recruiting from the displaced persons. Displaced persons are pretty desperate and would do anything pretty much to survive, right? Okay, sorry. I said I wasn't going to do that. Anyway, recent wartime experience with resistance groups behind German lines heavily influenced American thinking about the emigres. Americans hoped that if war with the USSR broke out, Eastern and Southern Europeans would become resistance fighters like the French Meklis. As relations between the United States and the Soviet Union deteriorated, the Central Intelligence Agency expanded its ties with these emigres, using the Ukrainians as an example. This bonding illustrates the pitfalls and the problems of enlisting disaffected ethnic minorities in an ideological struggle. Okay, I'm sorry. I know I said I wouldn't inject it, but I gotta wonder when I see and read information like this, using them as an example. I see all of these disaffected and displaced persons just pouring into our country right now, too. Are they going to be exploited and taken advantage of? I'm just wondering. Anyway, sorry. Said I wasn't going to do that. And because I'm repetitive, I had to say it again. Jeez. Yeah, that's probably annoying, isn't it? Hesitant first encounter. American intelligence had its first tentative encounter with Ukrainian immigrant groups as early as April of 1946, marking the beginnings of one of the earliest and most controversial covert action projects of the Cold War. The Strategic Services Unit, or SSU, the successor to the Wartime Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, and precursor to the Central Intelligence Group and Central Intelligence Agency, learned about anti-Soviet Ukrainian resistance movements that continued after the war in Western Europe. Boleslav A. Holtzman, SSU's X2 counterintelligence representative in Munich, became the primary American contact with Ukrainian leaders in the American zone in Germany by September of 1946. So we have a character here, Boleslav A. Holtzman. I guess some information here on the reference points. A description of the first contact between American intelligence and the Ukrainian nationalists is found in Zoltaradi, Zsoltaradi, to Chief of Mission, Belladonna Project. You can research that, look that up. 24 June 1946. Information management, staff job. Well, it gives kind of address information. A week earlier, SI Austria designated the American Ukrainian contact as Project Belladonna. Alfred C. Ulmer Jr. to Chief, Secret Intelligence Branch, SSU, Germany. Project Belladonna. Have to research that, folks. Project Belladonna. It's not that hard to look up this information. Ukrainian Nationalist Movements, 16 July 1946. Washington, Registered Intelligence Records. Entry 109. National Archives and Records Administration. So these are the sources for what they were saying here, where they were talking about how if this was a precursor, the Strategic Services Unit, SSU, the successor of the Wartime Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and the precursor to the Central Intelligence Group and the Central Intelligence Agency. So this was the precursor, the group that was before the Central Intelligence Agency. Yeah, there's one of the characters, Boleslav A. Holtzman, a counterintelligence officer in Munich. Mm-hmm. Ukrainian sources gave Holtzman several reports dealing with the organization of Soviet intelligence in Western Europe. Three problems prevented immediate and close collaboration between SSU and the Ukrainian immigrants. Most importantly, American intelligence was woefully ignorant of the different Ukrainian groups and their aims. Colonel William Quinn, director of SSU, recommended gathering intelligence about the history, reliability, and motivation of the disparate Ukrainian immigrant organizations before major steps are taken to exploit them for intelligence purposes. Let me repeat that. Before major steps are taken to exploit them for intelligence purposes. Mm-hmm. A second problem was the war record of some anti-communist Ukrainians. The struggle between the Hormak and Red Army awakened and inflamed ancient rivalries and hatreds in Ukraine. Many Ukrainians despised Poles and Jews as well as Soviet communists. Ukrainians served in the German army and had been linked to Nazi atrocities on the Eastern Front. Motivation and reliability were final SSU concerns. Quinn considered the Ukrainians adroit political intriguers and past masters in the art of propaganda. How about that? Political puppet masters in the art of propaganda who would not hesitate to use the United States for their own ends. Moreover, immigrant groups in general and Soviet ethnic minority groups in particular were obvious targets of Soviet penetration and manipulation. Ukrainian personalities and groups. Zsolt Aradi, a Hungarian consultant with SSU, was instrumental in establishing American intelligence contacts with the Ukrainians. Aradi had written The Ukrainian Nationalist Movement for SSU in October of 1946 and used his ties with Ukrainian church officials at the Vatican to meet immigrant leaders in Germany. So the church in on the whole exploitation thing and propaganda. Aradi initially worked with Father Ivan Chrenyuk and Yuri Lopatinsky, I think that's how it's spelled, members of the Ukrainian Supreme Liberation Council, UHVR, or Ukrainska Halovna Vzolna Rada. Yeah, that's terrible. I butchered that. Henrik, a Greek Catholic priest and longtime Ukrainian nationalist, served as the UHVR's second vice president, while Lopatinsky acted as liaison between UHVR and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, or UPA, Ukrainska Повстанка Armia. And it gives some reference points here. It's so hard to read that. Yeah. You can look up any of the reference points if you can see it on the screen. I doubt it. They're going to distort it even more, but it's not that hard to look up some of these reference points. In a lot of these files, they'll give reference points and their resources, so it's not that hard to really look it up. But so then we go down here. We have Zolt Arari right here used his Vulcan ties. Is that Vulcan? Man, this typewriter is so hard to read. Vatican, that's what it says. Yep. He used his Vatican ties to expand U.S. intelligence's awareness of the Ukrainian resistance movement. Wow. Yeah. Still in Ukraine fighting the Soviets. That was this one here. Let's see. And the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the UPA, still in Ukraine fighting the Soviets. UHVR's claims that the UPA was engaged in a fierce struggle against Soviet troops in Ukraine and attracted American interest and eventual support. Of course, any place that they can go and just take advantage and exploit the situation. Arati also met Mykola Lebed, a fierce nationalist and key figure in the Ukrainian liberation movement. Lebed, one of the founders of the Organization Ukrainskich Nationality, or Organization of Ukrainian. Oh, all the way down here. Wow, yeah, it's showing all the Ukrainian nationalists. Served as the foreign minister of Zakordon Predstavnictvo. I butchered that. Some foreign guy, some foreign minister, UHVR, or foreign representation of the Ukrainian Supreme Liberation Council. Lebed fervently believed in Ukrainian independence but was controversial. Poland sentenced him to death, later commuted to life in prison for his involvement in the assassination of the Polish Minister of the Interior in 1934. Yeah, there's Mykola Lebed. Yuri Lebedinsky, one of the first Ukrainian contacts. Yeah, these images. Ivan Chernak, UHVR's second vice president in Germany, was a leading point of contact between the Ukrainian resistance movement and U.S. intelligence. Wow, yeah. Arati dubbed this group of Ukrainians as, here we go with the 33s, Referat 33 or R33. Now keep in mind, the U.S. and Americans are involved in this operation. So it's kind of curious that they would have a 33 in there, huh? And discussed its members, personalities in an operational report of 27 December 1946. Hrynyak, Lebed, and Lepetinsky, he wrote, were determined and able men, but with the psychology of the hunted. They are ready to sacrifice their lives or to commit suicide at any time to further their cause or to prevent security violations, and they are equally ready to kill if they must. It is always necessary to remember, Arati added, that they have an almost religious worship of their nation and distrust anything foreign. First and foremost, Polish, then Russian, then German. Nonetheless, Arati thought them useful if the Americans treated them properly. Interesting, huh? There's that 33. Here's one of the main characters now. Stefan Bandera was not a member of R33, but was another personality, perhaps the personality of the Ukrainian immigrant community that had to be recognized. According to an OSS report of September 1945, Bandera had earned a fierce reputation for conducting a reign of terror during World War II. He led the largest faction of OUN, which split when the war broke out, and Audrey Melnick led the smaller. Both factions participated in terrorist activities against Polish officials before the war, and Ukrainian nationalists allied themselves with their Nazi liberators during the first days of Operation Barbarossa in 1941. Another one you can look up Operation Barbarossa, Barbarossa. Anyway, even though OUN's enthusiasm diminished after the Nazis failed to support Ukrainian statehood, many Ukrainians continued to fight alongside the Germans until the end of the war. At the same time, Nazis rounded up OUN members and placed them in concentration camps. Which groups had the best claim to legitimacy and popular support? Arati drew on his contacts and reported in December 1946 that, quote, after a thorough study of the Ukrainian problem and a comparison of information from several sources in Germany, Austria, and Rome, source Arati believes that UHVR, UPA, and OUN Bandera are the only large and efficient organizations among Ukrainians, based on intelligence that leaders of the UHVR had provided. Arati decided that this group is recognized as having the support of the younger generation and of the Ukrainians at home. He theorized that opposition to UHVR in Ukrainian circles arose because the organization is independent and forceful and has always refused to collaborate with Germans, Poles, or Russians. The first projects. In mid-1946, Arati and Holtzman launched two separate espionage and counter-espionage projects for SSU X2. There's that X in there too. Ukrainians still in Germany. Using Ukrainians still in Germany. Belladonna drew upon Arati's contact with Chernyak to collect information on the Soviet military. Lynx, under Holtzman direction, focused on identifying Soviet agents in Western Germany. Project Trident replaced Lynx in early 1947. You can research it. You can look up Project Trident. Trident promised better control of Ukrainian affairs and security. Project Ukulele, under Bill Holtzman's direction and an offshoot of Lynx/Trident, drew upon the services of a double agent known as Slavko. Dun dun dun. New character. In all three projects, Holtzman and Arati used Myron Medvedko, chief of OUN's security branch, Sluzba Bezpika, as their primary contact in Munich. Using Medvedko proved a mistake. Oh, this is him right here. Oh my. He was an Abwehr agent during the war and later exchanged information gained from OUN's bunkers in Germany for protection in the American zone and some minor operational supplies. His reports soon became unreliable and his actions questionable, so the CIA dropped him in 1954. Ineptitude. In 1951, Medvedko defected to the Soviets and denounced the entire Ukrainian emigre leadership as Nazi collaborators and tools of the capitalist intelligence services. Good call. Medvedko's defection confirmed some American and Ukrainian suspicions that he had been a Soviet double agent throughout his work with U.S. intelligence. Medvedko's illegal activities during the late 1940s, including murder and counterfeiting, strained American willingness to work with the Ukrainians in Germany. By the spring of 1947, headquarters reported that Washington does not feel that intelligence derived from such Ukrainian groups is worth the time and effort which would necessarily have to be expended on such a project. Experience has shown that information derived from such organizations has been both low-grade and ideologically based. Wow, what do you know? Holtzman, in fact, dropped arrangements with the Lynx Group in late 1946 and focused on more limited contact under Operation Trident. In doing so, he severed relations with Chernyak, who had been Arati's source, while still maintaining contact with Medvedko. In the meantime, OUN's ongoing internal dissension further tested American patience with the Ukrainians. After a stormy meeting in Germany in August 1948, the leaders of the ZPUHVR in Germany, principally Lebed and Chrenyak, broke with Bandera's OUN. The increasingly totalitarian attitude taken by Bandera and his stubbornness towards the West constituted the main reasons behind this break. Hiding Bandera. The Soviet Union's demand for repatriating all its citizens suspected of war crimes in collaboration with the Nazis complicated Aradi's and Holtzman's work with the Ukrainians, while they established initial contacts with OUN and CPU-HBR. American acquiescence in the Soviet demand would damage relations with the Ukrainians. American refusal, on the other hand, would damage relations with the USSR and Germany. Put in a little pickle there, huh? Citizenship issues further complicated the problem. The redrawn borders of Poland and the USSR put portions of Ukraine in both countries. Hence, many Ukrainians claim to be Polish citizens exempt from repatriation to the USSR. The Soviets wanted Stefan Bandera. American intelligence officials recognized, the Soviets wanted Stefan Bandera, and American intelligence officials recognized that his arrest would have quick and adverse effects on the future of U.S. operations with the Ukrainians. According to Aradi, Bandera's arrest, quote, would imply to the Ukrainians that we as an organization are unable to protect them, i.e., we have no authority. In such a case, there is not any reason or sense for them to cooperate with us. One of the reasons why full cooperation between the UHBR and our organization has not developed yet is the suspicion of these leaders that we will ultimately betray them. Already had a reputation of betrayal. From the very beginning, they complained that Americans have no real interest in them and that communist penetrated USA officers or officials will trade them to Russia. This belief was shared by both the Bandera people and the conservative Ukrainians. Arani concluded that if it should be decided not to use these people and their organization for intelligence purposes, it would be better to arrest not only Bandera, but all the leaders whose names and whereabouts are known to us. Interesting. So, if you can't influence them and use them and exploit them for intelligence, you just get rid of them. Headquarters disagreed with Aradi's assessment, and indeed had never put much credence in the intelligence, in quotation marks, the Ukrainians were providing. The Central Intelligence Group recognized that Bandera's extradition to the Soviet Union would be a blow to the underground movement, but noted that his organization is, as the field agrees, primarily a terrorist organization. Harry Rositsky, the acting chief of Special Projects Division Soviet SPDS, wrote on 7 January 1947 that the case of Bandera's extradition and our part in it brings to the force the whole Ukrainian problem. If the sine qua non of Ukrainian cooperation is political, then we should cease all direct contact immediately. We are not in a position to give it, and if we attempt to create the impression that we can expect only bad results, for it will become obvious sooner or later that the protection we offer is extremely fragile as factors beyond our control are brought into play. If we accept the premise that political support is out, we must also face the fact that in the long run, operations using the Ukrainians as an organized group will probably turn out to be worthless, simply because without political support, the Ukrainian nationalist groups will be decimated by Soviet pressure and demoralization. It is therefore difficult to see the Bandera problem as really significant. The effects of Bandera's arrest will only be to precipitate an inevitable development. So, in other words, protect this guy who was deemed as a terrorist, knowing his organization was a terrorist organization. Got to keep him in play, though, because he gives you that opposition so that you can maintain your presence, right? It's shameful.